I'm having a hard time disciplining myself. I particularly struggle to establish a schedule. How did you make a schedule so that many of your highest goals could be attained? I know that you've talked about making a schedule on many occasions, but I would like a look inside your schedule from the time that you think was your prime. Well, some people find it harder than other people to make a schedule. One thing you might consider doing is doing the personality test at understandmyself.com and seeing what you're like. Maybe you're particularly low in conscientiousness, in which case making a schedule and sticking to a routine, an orderly routine, is going to be quite difficult for you. But that'll at least help you understand perhaps at least some of the problem. Maybe you're high in negative emotion or neuroticism, and so you worry too much about making a schedule, and that just stops you from doing it. I would say, well, first thing to do is, there's two things you could do. First of all, the first thing you might want to do is figure out why you want to make a schedule to begin with. So you talked about goals. Well, what is it that you want to accomplish? The Future Authoring Program at selfauthoring.com, another one of our websites, helps people make a detailed plan for the future. And so you can't really have a schedule without having a plan, because the activities you schedule should be intelligently related to goals you wish to achieve that are important to you. And so you need to have goals that you wish to achieve that are important to you, and you have to know what they are. And that's complicated, right? That's like a plan for your life. So it's very difficult. And so that's why we produced this exercise, which helps step you through the process of deciding what you want and need. There's a present authoring program there too that helps you identify your virtues and your faults. And part of your plan can involve capitalizing on those virtues and rectifying those faults. And so that can be an interesting addition to this process. But in any case, you have to figure out what you want. And then you have to figure out how to decompose what you want into actionable steps, right? And those would be the sorts of things that you could put in a schedule. Now, that would mean that your schedule would hypothetically consist of things that maybe you don't exactly want to do, although that would be good, but at least you understand the importance of doing and are therefore somewhat motivated to do. And then you need to break those steps down into small enough increments that you're highly likely to undertake them. So for example, this is a trivial example, maybe you have to do a report on a given topic for school, and you're not very good at that. Well, maybe you could go to the library one day and just check out the library. That might be enough. And then maybe you could go to the library and take out a book. And then maybe you could open the book and look through it. Those would be on different days. And then maybe you could sit down and read the first page of the book. And if you can't do that, then the first paragraph. You have to negotiate with yourself and figure out what the largest step you would take towards your goal is that you would take. And if you don't do it, then you make the step smaller and smaller until you find something that you would do. The next thing you need to do, potentially, is to familiarize yourself with a scheduler like Google Calendar. So the first thing to do is open it, and then maybe to figure out how to put in a task and then a repeating task. And might be a pretty simple one to begin with. It's like, well, why don't you list waking up and specify a time, or going to bed and specifying a time, an approximate time anyways, or put in the schedule when you eat. And those are things you do every day. And so that's something you're pretty likely to do. And so that's a success for you. And then, then you can start by putting in something small. Maybe you need to read, maybe you need to exercise, maybe you need to have a social event with people. Maybe you need to watch TV, a movie, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Hopefully it's something you want to do. Put it in the schedule. And you could start by scheduling the things that you would like to do. So you can imagine, I like going out to movies. I like going to the mall. I like hanging around with my friends. I like watching TV. I like reading a book. I like listening to music. Well, then schedule those things. And so then you think, well, that means I'm forcing myself to do them. It's not that. It's that now you're allowing yourself time to do them, right? So the schedule becomes a means of you getting what you want instead of an external jailer who punishes you every time you deviate from requirement. So you have to make friends with the schedule, and the schedule has to be your friend, your ally. Well, I shouldn't use that word, but you know what I mean. It should work for you and not against you. You're not generating an external tyrant. You are generating something that you could be held to, and that's be responsible to. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be somewhat burdensome, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. But generally, you should approach it as if this is something that will help you get what you want. And it's also a pretty good way of controlling anxiety, because one of the most common sources of anxiety is just not knowing what to do. And people often think about that as boredom, and it is boredom to some degree. It can be, but it can also be very anxiety provoking. It's like, well, what should I do? I don't know what to do. Well, I have to do something. There's all these things I could do, and I don't want to make that decision every hour. So a schedule that you design that you like can be an incredible relief. And one thing we do know is that conscientious people tend to be lower in negative emotion. And it looks like that's a causal consequence, is that orderly people, for example, because they order their environment and make it more predictable, then they're less likely to be anxious, because we're often made anxious by what is unpredictable. So generating a view of your life consists of valued goals that you want to attain, and then steps by which those might be attained. And the Future Authoring Program helps you figure all that out. Well, then you can ally that with a schedule. And then, not only do you know what you're doing, you know that what you're doing is moving you towards something you want, and that's rewarding. And having your time structured like that and attaining those goals is pleasurable and anxiety reducing. So, that's a pretty good deal, all things considered. And you can start stupid and slow. Like I said, just throw some things in that you're pretty likely to do, and fill in the schedule with broad strokes. And then as you get familiar with it and comfortable with it and maybe even happy with it, you can fill in the details and start to use it in a more sophisticated way. Everyone I know who's accomplished, almost everyone I know who's accomplished, does structure their time explicitly in that manner. They've learned to do that over the years. Now, not everyone does that. Really, really entrepreneurial people might have a harder time with it, especially if they're low in conscientiousness. But, and then with regard to the personality test, maybe you do a personality test, the personality test I mentioned, say, and you find out that you're agreeable but low in conscientiousness. Well, so it's going to be harder for you to stick to a schedule, but you do like to please other people, so that's one of the things that you could schedule. You'd be highly likely to do that. If you're extroverted, you could schedule time, socializing with people. If you're introverted, you could schedule time by yourself, walking in nature, for example, or doing whatever else it is that you might want to do by yourself. If you're open, you could schedule in creative time, and then you'd be motivated to do those things. So you're having a hard time disciplining yourself. That's par for the course. Like I said, really conscientious people are more inclined in that direction. But it's hard to discipline yourself in relationship to a goal. It's like training a cart horse to pull a cart. It's difficult. And so you start with little things, and maybe little things that you want to do, and then you can proceed to harder things that you don't want to do so much, for their extrinsic or intrinsic utility, but you have to do them because they're related to something important. You'll get disciplined across time if you do that. And incremental improvement that's sustained is extremely powerful from the perspective of transformation.